Everyone. Welcome to another episode of ESG Climate and Money Show. In our last two episodes, we have discussed in detail about the greenwashing and different. We started very simple and then we went very deep into the greenwashing topic. And today, my co-host Stephen have come up with a great paper where we will discuss about this. It's his idea that we should discuss this paper because it's very relevant to the previous two episodes. So I think for the benefit of the audience, for the overall ESG community, this is very interesting discussion we are going to have. We had one discussion already off the record, and now we are going to share what we discussed. Welcome, Stephen. So what are we having today?
Well, good to see you, Sonny. Thanks. It's always a pleasure to connect with you and have these discussions. So what we have on the table today is a working paper by Professor Alex Edmans from the London Business School.
Is it from the Oxford? I think it's from the Oxford, right? No,
London Business School.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
And the title of it is The End of ESG. It's a working paper that he has. It is a working paper from the European Corporate Governance Institute. And he's got a bit of a provocative thesis, and he breaks the paper up into four main lines of argumentation. And so the central thesis is that ESG is at once extremely important and nothing special.
Wow.
Yeah, right. And so he walks you through why he makes that argument, and so we can kind of unpack it and see if we're buying what he's selling. Okay. His argument is that when you take this approach that ESG at once is extremely important and nothing special, there's four primary implications that he identifies. Firstly, is that companies should not be praised more for improving their ESG performance than other intangibles that drive long-term value and value creation. Second is that investors who greenwash are rightly to be held account, but at the same time, other investors who do not utilize ESG or sell ESG type products should also be held to account too, right? Investors who invest in non-ESG funds should receive the same sorts of protections that as those investors who invest in ESG funds. The third thing he says is that practitioners should not rush to do something special for ESG factors that they would not do for other drivers of value. Right? One of his closing lines is that we want great companies, right? Not just great ESG companies.
Yeah. So we just don't want companies who are very good at greenwashing and reports and their communication skills. So we want actually great companies doing good things in ESG as well at the same time.
Right. And to really bring home his thesis that ESG is important and nothing special at the same time, his final implication that he identifies is that many of the controversies surrounding ESG become moot when we view ESG as a set of long-term value factors. So what he's trying to do here, and again, we can unpack it here in a minute, is that he's trying to thread a needle, right? Because when we talk about ESG, you have evangelists on one side, and you have detractors on the others. And sometimes you'll have apostates, right? Those who bought into ESG early and it's like, no, it's not going to work.
Yeah. So you have famous comedians or the podcasters like Joe Rogan, and you have this Russell Brand recently. So they think like the ESG is just like a bluff, and it is like the way the elite is trying to capture the value. And I mean, we have plenty of those people, but these are what I see normally in the media.
Right. And so he's trying to bring some balance to the discussion. He's also trying to shift the vision, right? Is that is that ESG has to be part of the matrix that makes up long-term value creation. At least
That's
factor
interesting.
into the investment decision.
That is very interesting. Yeah, I when you sent it to me and I went through the paper, it's very beautifully, you can say, like written in a very rhythmic way, and it goes from introduction to all the way to the evolving landscape of ESG metrics and the surge in ESG funds and the controversies which are surrounding ESG, and the end, of course, as from his researcher's point of view, what are the implications for that in the research when everything is non-aligned and you can't really kind of do things in a traditional way. So this is very interesting. So let's go more deeper in this topic, because we have been discussing about these topics without understanding that there exists a paper also talking similar things, but more with some arguments which may be more proper compared to our banters. So yeah, what do you think on this, that how relevant is it today, this paper?
So I think for the listeners, this paper came out in September of this year, so it's new, but it is an issue that Professor Edmans has been thinking about for quite some time. He has a book that further expounds on these ideas called Grow the Pie. I'm going to assign it for my sustainable finance course that I'll teach in the spring semester here at Wingate. But I do think he's onto something. I think that, so he writes, and this is in the abstract. Obviously, he goes a lot deeper in the actual paper itself. But he said, companies shouldn't be praised more for improving their ESG performance than these other intangibles, such as company culture, patent production, right? And the second one is investor engagement on ESG factors shouldn't be put on a pedestal compared to engagement on other value drivers. So what he's pushing for is there is an important place for ESG, but it is part of a holistic approach for investor engagement in driving value creation in a company, in the production of good companies, not just companies who are good at ESG. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in there. He points out that there's an annual survey that leads to the best companies to work for. And some finance professors wrote a paper on it where those that made that list, the best companies to work for, also performed better relative to their peers in terms of value creation.
Yeah, it's more because of the motivated workforce, right?
In part.
Yeah.
Right. But it could also be, management decides to invest in R&D, which leads to greater innovation, which leads to patent production, which allows them to bring new products to market. So it's a number of things. And again, ESG, what your footprint is in terms of the environment, GHG emissions, if you're an energy company, do you pollute local rivers? This is a problem that we have here in North Carolina with Duke Power. The social component, not only are you good to your employees, but are you good to your neighbors, fence line communities and such? And are you well managed, right? So again, he's arguing that if it needs to be part of a holistic vision of how we understand and engage with companies. I think there's merit to it, for sure.
Yes, of course, like 360-degree understanding of the business, and then you are incorporating ESG based on that 360 degrees understanding of that particular industry or particular business. So it's not like one thing which is on the periphery, and then you can just dismiss it. Oh, well, that's just the ESG. No, it's more than that. So it's more deeper. And of course, I mean, it does not make sense for any company to not having the governance factors. It does not make sense for a company to having these social factors. And also the environmental factors are also key for the long-term business, the kind of the good performance. And in this paper, I saw he quoted this true cost. The number is $4.7 trillion. I think he talks about that in the US, like that is the amount of like the trillions of dollars which environmental cost is. And this was in 2013. Imagine that, it's probably double by now. So this is extremely interesting point in my understanding related to that. But there is also another thing, Stephen. I don't know why people need to be convinced about these things, that environmental approach is good approach and social approach is good approach and governance is good governance. Governance is important for the good business. It is really sometimes I often get confused about this thing, that why we need to convince people. Don't they think by themselves? It all makes just like the common sense. It should be the part of your common sense. And if you have your brain working and all your brain cells are functioning properly, you should be actually thinking in these lines already. But that's very very interesting.
Well, let me tell you a story that from yesterday. I was on a webinar about a product launch from a business education company, and what they do is they provide simulations that students can do attached to a business class, finance, management, what have you. And so they were launching. They have a sustainable management module or simulation module, and they have a sustainable finance one. And they sent out emails to business faculty around the country. And they didn't say who it was, rightly so, but one business school faculty member in the United States wrote back and referred to it, didn't even say, "Dear so-and-so," just went right into it. No foreplay. Said, "This is leftist woke bullshit. Do not send this to me again."
I mean, this is exactly, I mean, the thing which I have observed on the internet, for example, when I talk about this Joe Rogan and like this type of podcasts, and like the people criticizing, for example, COP27. And
Rogan is a charlatan, right? This is a business professor.
Yeah. So this is the I don't know, man. This is why I was saying, like, why common sense could be so hard for people to understand. And if these things, I mean, I don't want to use a word, some profane word in this thing, but I just want to say, like, does it what does it cost to be a good person, like, and not be a hole, if I may say? So it's really interesting. I mean, if you are good with your employees and you are actually very deliberate related to your supply chains, and you are good with your this understanding your supply chains and how good you are in terms of S factors. And then if you are running your company properly and you are working for your shareholders, and I mean, these are the normal things. And of course, the environmental thing is still we can debate about, because people have less awareness. It's a lot to do with awareness. But really dismissing this whole thing as leftist thing, and this is also mentioned in this paper as well, in this controversies of ESG, where he talks about the politicization and also left versus right thing. And we have talked about this in our podcast as well before. So this is insane. And I think as a podcast, we are trying to simplifying these subjects and trying to make it easier for the other ESG experts and to discuss about these things, and giving them probably confidence that you don't need to think that you are not doing something right. I think it should come natural to many people that these are the right things to do. And yeah.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And so this is the mentioning of what Professor Edmans is trying to do is depoliticize ESG. And he says you can do that if you are deliberate in making ESG as part of a set of factors that go into long-term value creation, right? And I do think that is very, very important. And again, it's something that on I think our first conversation that we had, for me, ESG is still what it means, still hangs in the balance because of issues of greenwashing that we've discussed quite often, because of issues of the inability to have the sort of comparability across ESG scores, which he also talks about. And it's important for us to get to there in just a minute. But if we can like turn down the volume in relation to how this is understood and convince people that it is important, not just for saving the environment, but also for the evolution of this sustaining healthy companies, right? Great companies.
Yeah, it's the long-term value creation which people are missing out on. If you really think in those terms, if there will be no planet, if your workforce is demotivated because how bad you are, and if your supply chains, like your suppliers even think you are just taking advantage of them, and then later on, I mean, you could be taking, for example, cocoa products from Africa, and then you could be just beautifully marketing your chocolate or other products. And in the end, if you don't really work on the bottom line, and if you're not working with your supply chains, which may have been doing something wrong because of lack of knowledge or understanding, and you're not doing the right thing, eventually the whole ecosystem will collapse and you have nothing to produce or sell. So yeah, so it is like that you are saying, and it does have merit.
Right, because what you're touching on right now, Sonny, is the whole can of worms known as transition risk, right? Because if you're not paying attention to these sorts of things, you'll expose yourself to litigation risk, you'll expose yourself to regulatory risk, right? Because it may come to a point where cocoa from Western Africa will either be, they could increase the import tax on it, or they could say, look, you just can't do it because it's effectively blood coca. So this is, again, it goes to the merit of considering this as factors when you're thinking about long-term value, which many obviously institutional investors concern themselves with. And this is another, I'm sure you've before I joined the program, I'm sure you talked about it, but the whole idea of short-termism, not only among companies, but also among certain investors and whatnot, where, you're not worried what's happening 10 quarters, 12 quarters, 20 quarters down the line. It's what this quarter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not, if you know as your pension is at risk, that's a big problem. And you have to think about these long-term issues. And that's why we see so much focus these days on these factors as well, which is a positive thing, because there is no planet to be exploited later on. We only have one planet.
Yeah. So the second implication, so we've hit the first, we've hit the fourth. The second one, and I find this one very important too, focuses on, people who greenwash need to be held to account. Like you and I, we're totally on board. That makes perfect sense to us. But he extends it. He says, look, investors who are not investing in ESG funds deserve the same protections. And so for those non-ESG funds that are actively managed, that are in practice actually closet index funds, they need to be held to account, right? Those investors need to be protected. And the other one that he mentioned was also those actively managed funds that are not ESG focused that systematically underperform. So it widens the pool of accountability, is what he's
Absolutely.
asserting.
And this is, I would like to throw in the number which he quoted in his paper, and that is like every $1 among $3, or like 1/3 of the dollars, at least in the US, are invested in this, which are under the management, under the ESG products. It's in the at least in the US. So these are the amount of financial products you're having. You're talking about like 33, 35% of the total what you have under the management. So it's so enormous and it's so powerful. Imagine that going in a right way and doing in a right way. So yeah, absolutely.
And the third one, the third implication, if we accept his thesis that ESG is at once extremely important and nothing special, is that practitioners shouldn't rush to do something special for ESG factors that they would not do for other drivers of value. I mean, we've kind of circled this throughout the discussion. Such as, let me finish that thought. So they shouldn't do something special for ESG factors that they wouldn't do for other drivers of value, such as demand that every company tie executive pay to ESG factors, force a firm to report them, even if not relevant to its particular business, or reduce complex intangibles to simple quantitative metrics.
Yeah, very nice. You summarized these points. And one of the things I wanted to bring up in this discussion is that there is some issue related to this transition. And that is that, for example, once you have this, you start to take care of your environmental factor and you close down a factory, then you are talking with the workforce which have no work to go. Mm-hmm. And then you are actually, your S factor is going down suddenly because of this employee satisfaction. And you are doing very good with the environment, but your social factor is going down. Or at least in Scandinavia, in Norway, for example, also in Sweden, if you lose your job in this type of situation, at least there is a support system. The state can help you take courses, get back you to the work, or kind of upskill you to get into the new work. But unfortunately, this is easy to say. And this is not easy to do for everywhere, especially for the big countries like US, for example. Mm-hmm. So, or many Asian countries where once you lose your work after 20 years of working, you are literally going to stay jobless for the rest of your life. And that is similar with the AI taking away your jobs. In this case, environment is going to take away your jobs. And in this case, it's like many jobs are like stranded as stranded jobs.
Well, they're stranded workers.
Yeah, and they are stranded workers. And what would you do with that? That is a very big challenge. And I think the policymakers and the regulators, they have to make sure, like when you're doing this transition, and if the company is going to do with this transition, and especially people issuing green bonds, I think this factor should be accounted in. Today, it is not, unfortunately. But of course, if some company is going to do some bold work related to this environment, then you have to come up with the new metrics, which is saying we will take this workforce and we will upskill them, and they will be getting back to work very soon, maybe in our own company or maybe in some other place. But unfortunately, that is not happening. And I see this all the time. For example, companies getting this $1 billion based on the sustainability linked bonds, and then they're cutting down their workforce. That is very bad. And that shouldn't happen, in my understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. This also touches upon the social compact, not just between workers and the company and the community, but also government and the communities that they're there to represent. And when we start talking about that, then we start talking about political will. And in the United States, since we're a federal system, political will is not even across the board, right? and so that's why there's a room for a federal presence in these sorts of work transition programs. But also, local elections matter, and it can dictate whether or not that political will is there to provide the programs that can help upskill stranded workers. I mean, the big one here in the United States, or one of the big ones here in the United States, is the coal sector in West Virginia. I mean, what are these? And we're talking about families that for generations have produced coal miners. What's going to happen to them? What sort of funds are being allocated to help these workers? Are the unions being proactive? And they have been. I mean, with the Inflation Reduction Act, there is money set aside for these types of programs. But is it enough? Right? Is the quantity that's necessary there? Remains to be seen. So when we put all this together, Sonny, actually, I do want to talk about ESG scores. There's more than 600 providers, man.
Yeah. I mean, I saw this in my ESG investing certification as well. We had a big chapter around this, and this was very funny one. Is nobody is talking to nobody, and there is no kind of there is no regular framework, and there is no set framework. Everybody could be biased. That's very unfortunate. I think there was a big research paper around it.
What Edmans says, sure, bias is there, but at the same time, what Edmans argues for the listeners is that reasonable people are going to disagree as to what drives value. And so that may also in part help explain why there's no correlation across ESG scores.
So he's expecting people to have more common sense, which is which is complicated.
Right. All right, man. So let's bring it home.
Yeah, let's finish it off.
Let's return to his thesis. ESG is at once extremely important, and nothing special.
Yeah,
you buying it?
And repeat the title. Was it the ESG is dead, or is this
the end of ESG? And
end. It's not the death exactly. So I think he talks about this topic as well. Why he put this provocative topic, and it's actually good.
Yeah. So I mean, what he's arguing is that it should not be. It should not be special, right? It should be factored into how people engage companies as it relates to long-term value.
And look, it is evolving, and we shouldn't be that shallow-minded and narrow-minded and think like, okay, this is it. So this thing is evolving under this COP, which is going on in Egypt right now. There are new regulations coming in, new frameworks coming in. I don't know how effective they will be, but still, I mean, the progress is progress, however small. But with these thoughts, I think, Stephen, let's wrap up today's discussion. And very interesting talk. And I hope the listeners who are listening to our boring discussions before, I hope they enjoy this time. Thank you.
Yeah. It's worth the read, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll post the link in the show notes.
Absolutely, in the description as well.